So good morning, everybody. I'm Aaron. I'm really excited to be here today. To me, the response to events like this and opportunities is one of the leading indicators of the real, renaissance that we have coming together in Buffalo. That there's such a high level of consciousness around planning, and I'm really excited to be here at Bart's invitation. I'm going to try to get through a bunch of slides, and I'm going to do it pretty quickly. And I'm going to start, the first half of the presentation looking in a very sort of pedestrian, non-professional way, an amateur look at how I interpret the history of land use in Buffalo. Because if we don't know our history, obviously we don't know where we're going. I think one of the underlying themes that runs throughout the presentation I'm going to give on the history is that land is contested. Land has been contested even before this picture, the early picture of the Port of Buffalo. It's important to recognize that this was native land for hundreds and actually almost 1,000 years prior to what we think of as the modern history of Buffalo. So there's contest built into the history of land, the history of the Buffalo River. Picking up the story in the early 19th century, Buffalo, before it was a manufacturing center, was a mercantile port. We know with the rise of the Erie Canal in 1829, our waterfront land became designated primarily as warehousing, as a port culture, and as you can see there, the birth of the grain elevator culture. And then quickly, because of all the resources running through our land, especially our waterfront lands, we transitioned to become an industrial economy at the birth of industrialization. In the 1860s, 1870s, post-Civil War, we saw a huge population boom. And unlike a city like Chicago or even Detroit, which had similar industrialization processes, we didn't designate waterfront land as public land. We designated it as primarily industrial land, and you can still see that legacy up and down both the river and the lake. As we know, we're slowly recovering that land for public use, but we have a particular history when it comes to that land. There's a social history to every piece of land that we have in Buffalo. And in the case of industry, that history is a history of labor organizing, of learning to gain control over the resources and the wealth that came from the use of the land on the water. And then as the industrial economy grew and we became a bigger and bigger industrial city, that generated a particular set of cultural traits and uses and a particular type of neighborhood life that I think was rooted first and foremost in the tavern. And then you can see that it became the daycare up in the left-hand side. It also became the place where you could go and talk to your union steward about where to find work on a union job site, or your Democratic committeeman about who to vote for, or how to get a job on a sanitation truck. The parish obviously is another big building block of every neighborhood in Buffalo, and played a pretty crucial role in thinking about the land use of neighborhoods too, is often sort of the default plaza and civic center of each neighborhood. So the actual land use we know is really the result of two different plans. The Ellicott plan, that was really sort of an attempt to market the city through the Holland Land Company and incorporate some really European principles of radial street planning, of circles. And then the Olmsted Plan in the 1880s, which was an attempt to sort of create a pastoral element in Buffalo, greening the city in a way that we still benefit from. The reason I put the map up here is that it really hasn't changed that much. We're 100 years later, and we pretty much are working with the same street plan, the same built environment that we had 100 years ago, and we're finding out that that's to our great benefit, that we didn't knock down all of this and reconfigure in the way that some cities that grew more than we did in the last 50 years have. So we're now understanding that as one of our greatest assets. And then just looking at what I see as sort of the classic form of the city in Buffalo, that's St. Stan's and the Broadway-Fillmore area. This is a neighborhood that's lost a lot of its density, but at its peak you can see some pretty ideal densities, what urban planners I think now would think of as the quintessential walkable city. You had one of the great city market just down the street on Broadway, the Broadway Market. You had your place of worship. You had your local independent retail at the neighborhood level. So, it's not an attempt to sort of be anachronistic and pine for lost days, but I think it is important to recognize that the way our neighborhoods were built had some of the things that we aspire to sort of in the DNA, in the fabric of those cities. And then a look just at the Olmsted pastoralism. Humboldt Parkway, really, I never was able to see it, but I'm told really one of the greatest parkways that we had in the city, connected Delaware to MLK Park. And this is where some of the contest comes in and the understanding of class and race as it operates in a city, and of grand schemes, right? So this is the tragic day that the trees were cut down on Humboldt Parkway. Some folks in the room may remember Humboldt Parkway as, as a beautiful neighborhood, as a neighborhood where especially the African American middle class was gathering wealth, gathering power in this neighborhood. And just as that was happening, the great engineers of the 1950s decided to make it a highway, right? And so you can imagine the destabilizing effects, not just to the place, not just to the trees, but also to the social structure of that neighborhood when properties are devalued, new homeowner class, all of a sudden their homes are worth far less, and there's pollution in the neighborhood and so forth. And we also know, just in terms of the contest and the way that we think about land in this region, the whole infrastructural project of the 1950s was really about returning primarily white people after World War II to access mortgages in the suburbs and speed the growth of the suburbs. And those mortgages were codified as racist. They were not really accessible. FHA mortgages were not accessible to people of color. And so we created these highways to create the suburbs. Meanwhile, we had this other huge process that really, in many ways, is even bigger than suburbanization happening. We lost 200,000 jobs in 25 years. So anyone who has roots in Buffalo knows Bethlehem, knows that much of the wealth of all of our communities, whether it was Polish, Irish, African American, Italian, came from this site, and it disappeared almost overnight. Over a 10-year period. We lost thousands of jobs, and from a land use perspective, we also, had already lost access to the waterfront along this stretch, but then it became a toxic brownfield that we're still recovering from. So what did we do as we were dealing with these twin crises of suburbanization and deindustrialization? We tried some crazy things. We tried to create suburbs in the city by creating malls. And very alienating streetscapes that tried to accommodate the car in ways that were anti-urban. That this is sort of a classic killing the street look at what we did in the 1970s. Meanwhile, we were growing on the periphery without growing in population in the region. So meaning that we were our land use was doubling, I think, in a 20-year period without any population growth. So it's just basic math. If you're building these homes, out in East Amherst, out in Clarence, you're going to get this at the center because it's sort of a one-to-one relation. Every housing unit you're building out there creates a vacancy. So we, sort of devalued our core urban land by not having a regional growth plan, and we became the third most vacant city in the country behind Detroit and St. Louis. I think at our peak we had 16,000 vacant buildings. So that's all the bad news. And now I'm going to sort of suggest a way forward, what we call community-based capital. Now, what does that mean? Typically, capital in real estate markets is not open to much democratic input. The way we think about real estate is someone buys and someone sells, and that's about it. There's some zoning, laws that can structure that. There's some planning laws, but we don't have a lot of experience in thinking about how communities can come together to shape the development of their neighborhoods by allocating capital in a more collective way. One tradition that we do have in the U.S., it's a relatively young tradition, but is the Community Development Corporation, coming out of the '60s, coming out of some of the stuff in the war on poverty, the Johnson era, created a set of institutions across the country that could help to shape neighborhoods in the way they developed. I'm going to skip some of these slides because I know I'm short on time. This is sort of a look at the overview of Buffalo. and where we are. I'm going to go right to sort of the work that I actually do on a day-to-day basis. But before that, just look at some of the keys to the future of areas like Buffalo. Metro land use planning, meaning having a plan for growth. Actually, I'm going to go right to push because I just got my 5-minute warning. So this is sort of a look at what is an attempt to have a more communal, collective, community-based process for thinking about the development of a neighborhood. And this happens to be a very low-income neighborhood, really the most diverse neighborhood in the city of Buffalo, people from all over the world, people from every ethnic background on the west side. And this is a look at Push's attempt to shape a 25-block area. And I start with this picture. This is Jen McCosey and Tato Rivera, two longtime lifelong West Side residents. I start with the picture because for us, land, first and foremost, is about people's connection to the land and a neighborhood's ability to self-determine its future. Jen was working as a line cook at the town restaurant for about 15 years. Incredible leadership abilities, but never really had too many outlets to exercise those abilities. Tato brings a whole other skill set to the neighborhood. He's a master gardener, and now they're married. To us, there's a whole set of leaders that come out of the process, and these are two different sort of types of leaders. We try to put people in where their skill sets are and develop them from there. We have some mantras. One of it is when it comes to turning our neighborhoods around, we're all in this together, meaning that it's about power, it's about voice, it's not just about coming up with ideas. And one of the ways we build power and ideas is through collective planning processes. So we have what we call our Community Planning Congress once a year. That was just last month. We had about 175 residents of the West Side come out and put forward their ideas for the West Side. And then on a monthly basis, we have a committee that reviews those ideas, takes pieces of them, and moves them forward. Sometimes the ideas we're looking at are sort of larger thematic ideas, like you can see in this picture, the idea of affordable housing and the prospects of gentrification on the West Side and what that would mean to the neighborhood. Sometimes it's something more specific. It's a particular garden on the West Side that we're planning for. So as we think about these, we do bring some concepts of planning to the table. It's not just starting from a blank slate. And one of those is that we have a lot of typologies of neighborhoods in Buffalo. Some neighborhoods are fully densified still, meaning that they haven't experienced a lot of demolition, such as the one on the left side, that's Congress Street. Some neighborhoods have lost a lot of their density. They're more open land. Both neighborhoods, there are solutions or there are ideas for moving them forward, but those ideas may be different. On the right, you may focus more on green infrastructure, on urban farming, on preserving the housing that's there, but potentially not building a whole bunch of new housing. On the left, you might want to preserve that density. Another key part of our model is mobilization, making sure that once we have an idea, we can move that idea forward because we have some power. And power comes from being organized, from developing leaders, and from having campaigns that are fairly specific that win real resources for our neighborhood. So this is a look. We were blowing money out of the window of a house to show that that's what we do. All of us in Buffalo, we're heating the outdoors, especially in low-income neighborhoods if our homes are uninsulated. It's bad for the environment. It's a major contributor to climate change. And our attempt has been to create a new economy around addressing that solution, because every house in our neighborhood could be a job site. And this summer we've turned 25 different houses into job sites on the West Side. We're investing $12 million this summer in affordable housing and in weatherization just over the next 4 months. And there are 50 people working out there. So leadership development, what does that mean? It means people running their own meetings. It means coming up with campaigns and taking steps to become either an effective communicator, negotiator, planner in your own community. Running out of time here, but how we've organized all of these projects together is what we call our green development zone. We're now up to the point where we control 90 parcels of property in this zone. We have a range of interventions from retrofitted houses that we've done about 100 houses of weatherization and insulation to completely gutted and renovated buildings. This summer, as I mentioned, we're doing 24 different buildings at the same time. to what we call green infrastructure, meaning building rain gardens to deal with the combined sewer overflow problem, and then also to Samina's point, working with MAP on really creating the West Side as one of the main sites of innovative urban agriculture in the country. A few more pictures of affordable housing development. One thing that our development work does is it brings together not only people, but it also gives us sort of an interface with elected officials in a way to get them on board for our sort of revitalization plan. So not only has Councilmember Rivera supported the housing development up and down Massachusetts Avenue, but given that investment, he's seen the importance of putting infrastructure money, sidewalk money, street money, a new park right in the neighborhood as well. So this is a before picture of building at Chenango in Massachusetts, and then that's an after picture. And I want to stress that when we do something like this, we're building, really beautiful apartments, modern, open, light-filled apartments, but we're building them for the community. These are apartments that go to people. This is affordable housing. The neighborhood is in really desperate need for quality affordable housing. There are some cheap apartments on the West Side, but that doesn't mean they're quality. We have a lot of people dealing with lead, asbestos, uninsulation, bad landlords, slumlords. So we have a huge demand for buildings like this once we finish them. Here's another one. You can see our attempt as we do this work is to really respect as much as possible the architectural character and the fabric of the neighborhood. And for us, it's really about redensifying to the historic rates, 1950s, 1960s of the West Side, where you had a walkable, sustainable neighborhood with a lot of local independent retail. People at the center of the model, so once people come into our buildings, it's not about a landlord-tenant relationship as much as it is about keeping people together in campaigns, in community, in social life. And then I think I'll just end, I know I'm run out of time, with the idea that our neighborhoods really are potentially our greatest job sites, especially with climate change intensifying. 60% of carbon usage in the U.S. comes out of home-based consumption, meaning electricity, natural gas, the coal that's burned for that electricity. We can drastically reduce that consumption with some basic measures, weatherization, and other measures in each of our houses. And so if you're up for taking a tour of the West Side, I think I'd end by saying we have a monthly tour that really shows all the components, the job training component into weatherization, into green construction. We have actually a member of our crew, introducer Esmeralda, in the back, who is leading up our green infrastructure work on building rain gardens throughout the neighborhood to address the CSO crisis. So each of these sectors is a job creator as well as a sustainability promoter. I will end there, and I think we'll take questions afterwards. So thank you.